Get comfortable. Close your eyes if you'd like. This is a story about an island, about survival, and about the strange mercy of being found by something you never knew was looking for you. Morning comes to the island the way it always does, without asking. The light arrives first, grey and thin through the canopy, and then the sound. Birds whose names none of them know, water moving somewhere they haven't found yet. And beneath it all, so low it is almost not there, the frequency. It does not announce itself, it simply is, as it has been since the first morning, as Adaeze has come to understand it always will be. She is awake before the others. She has been awake for most of the night. Day 3. This is what day 3 looks like. 6 lean-tos arranged in a rough arc along the tree line, each one built from the wreckage of the forward fuselage and lashed with strips of fabric from the cargo hold. Connor built the first one in under 2 hours on the afternoon of day 1, working with a wordless efficiency that made people stop and watch, and then quietly start helping without being asked. By nightfall, there were 4. By the end of day 2, 6, enough to get most of the injured out of the open, enough to give the 47 of them something that almost resembles a camp. The lean-tos are not warm. They are not comfortable. They keep out the worst of the wind off the water, and that is enough for now, to be the difference between survival and something worse. The stream Connor and Marcus found on day 1 runs about 10 minutes inland, a clean, fast-moving thread of water cutting through the roots of the jungle floor. They have established a route to it now, worn into the undergrowth by repeated use. Val boiled the first 3 batches herself over the fire before she trusted it. She trusts it now. It is not the same as certainty, but on this island, on day 3, trust and certainty have the same practical value. Adaeze has the map. She has been studying it in the dark by the last light of the fire, tracing the lines with her finger, committing the nodes to memory the way she once catalogued survey grids in the Niger Delta. Methodically, without assumption, building a picture from data points before drawing any conclusion about what the picture means. 23 nodes, 23 marked points spread across the island's interior like a nervous system rendered in ink. She does not yet know what they are. She knows only that whoever drew this map knew the island well enough to name its hidden places, and that is the kind of knowing that takes a very long time, or a very specific reason to look. The others wake slowly. Connor is first after her. He sleeps like a man who has learned not to trust unconsciousness, surfacing quickly and quietly, already scanning. He checks the lean-tos by habit, tugging a lashing here, adjusting a crossbeam there, the way a person tends to a thing they built with their hands and therefore feel responsible for. Marcus surfaces next, sitting up slowly and rolling his shoulders and looking at the fire with the expression of a man running private calculations. Sam is up shortly after, moving carefully to keep from disturbing Grace, who finally slept deeply and genuinely after 2 fitful nights. Haruki last, sitting up with his knees drawn to his chest, looking towards the mountain the way he has looked at it every morning since he first saw the light there. Reid is already up. Reid, Adaeze has noticed, is never quite asleep when she checks. He merely rests with his eyes closed, and there is a difference. The morning routine, such as it is. Someone carries the 2 metal canisters salvaged from the galley cart down to the stream and back. Someone tends the fire. Val does her rounds of the injured, working through them one by one with a calm and focused attention that costs her more than she shows. Patrice, a retired army medic who has barely raised her voice since the crash but whose hands have not stopped working, moves alongside her. Between the two of them, they have kept everyone stable. Grace continues to improve, slowly and unevenly, the way head injuries do. The most serious case is a man named Tendai. He is older, perhaps 60, perhaps a little more, with a broad, quiet face, and the particular stillness of someone who has learned over a long life that panic accomplishes very little. He speaks Shona, and only Shona, and the language barrier has been one of the quieter cruelties of the 3 days since the crash. He cannot tell Val where it hurts most, cannot describe how the leg felt before and after, cannot ask the questions that are clearly sitting behind his eyes when she examines him each morning. Val works around this with gestures and expressions and the careful, unhurried touch of a doctor who understands that communication is not always words. He seems to trust her. He greets her each morning the same way, a soft morrow, a small nod, and she greets him back, and that exchange, small as it is, has become one of the few things on this beach that feels like it belongs to a world that still makes sense. Of all the people on this island, Tendai has complained the least. He watches everything with a patience that seems older than the situation requires, as though he has survived worse and is simply waiting to find out what this particular difficulty will ask of him. The 47 of them are eating from the emergency provisions recovered from the cargo hold. Meal bars, vacuum-sealed packets, things designed to sustain rather than nourish. This is where Adaeze has become unexpectedly essential. On the afternoon of day 2, she walked the jungle perimeter for 2 hours and came back with her jacket pockets full, breadfruit from a cluster of trees 20 minutes inland, heart of palm cut from a fallen sapling, a tangle of water convolvulus from the stream bank that she told them was edible and nutritious and that 3 people ate with visible reluctance, and then ate again when they realized they were still hungry. She knows this jungle the way she knows every ecosystem she has ever worked in. Not by name exactly, not this specific canopy in this specific ocean, but by logic, by pattern. Tropical forest systems follow rules, and she has spent 6 years learning to read them. The island, whatever else it is alive in ways she understands. She finds that, against all reasonable expectation, quietly comforting. She spreads the map on the sand when they have gathered, smoothing the edges with both hands. Connor is there. Marcus is there, standing slightly apart with his arms crossed, his eyes moving between the map and the faces around it, reading the room the way he always reads rooms, carefully and from a slight distance. Sam, Haruki, Val, already finished with her morning rounds, standing close to Adaeze with her arms folded and her expression attentive. Reid at the periphery, as always, present without quite committing to presence, and a little further back, propped against a piece of the fuselage with his injured leg extended and his hands resting loose in his lap. Tendai. He watches the map the way he watches everything, patiently, without anxiety, following the gestures and the expressions rather than the words, reading what he can from what people's bodies say when their language is not available to him. Adaeze says, "Here is where we are." She marks the beach with her thumb. Here is the bunker. She traces the path inland. Here is the mountain. And here she touches the nearest node, the one closest to their position. Here is where I think we should go today. The silence that follows is the kind that contains multiple disagreements trying to organize themselves into speech. Connor speaks first. He says he doesn't think splitting up is smart, and going further inland when they've barely secured the camp is exactly the kind of thing that gets people killed. He says the lean-tos need reinforcing before the next rain. The wind last night told him weather is coming, a day or two at most. And they still don't have enough water containers for the full group. And then he looks directly at Val. He says, and I think the group's doctor leaving when Tendai's leg is where it is and 2 other people have barely been conscious for 72 hours is not a decision I'd make. Val meets his eyes. She says, I hear you on the camp. You're right about the lean-tos and you're right about the water containers. She says it without softening it, because she means it. And then she says, but Patrice is not a retired medic in name only. She was a combat medic for 11 years. She has handled things in a tent in a forward operating base that I have not handled in a level 1 trauma center. And the patients we have right now are stable. She says stable means they need monitoring, not intervention. Patrice can do that. She says what they all need, what all 47 of us need, is for someone to go find out what we are actually dealing with on this island before we spend another week building a camp we may not be able to stay in. Connor says, you don't know that we can't stay here. Val says, and you don't know that we can. She lets that sit for a beat. She says, I'm not dismissing what you've built, Connor. The shelters, the water route, none of us would have lasted 2 nights without that. I mean that. But you are planning for the beach and I am trying to plan for whatever comes after the beach. And someone has to. Connor looks at the map. He looks at the jungle. He looks back at Val with the expression of a man who knows he has not lost an argument so much as run into the limits of one. He says, if anything changes with the wounded while you're gone, anything, Patrice sends someone in after you immediately. Val says, agreed, without hesitation. A beat. Connor nods, a short, functional nod, the kind that closes something without resolving it. Marcus has been quiet through all of it. He says now, evenly, I think you're both right, which is its own kind of problem. He says, I'll stay. Connor needs hands on the lean-tos and someone needs to be here who can talk people down if they start getting anxious watching the leaders disappear into the jungle. He looks at Connor. He says, put me to work. Connor looks at him for a moment. The nod he gives Marcus is slightly different than the one he gave Val, less loaded, and turns toward the shelters. Sam says he'll go. Haruki says nothing. He simply stands, which is answer enough. Reid says nothing either, but he does not sit back down. Val crouches beside Patrice and speaks to her quietly for a full 2 minutes, not handing off, briefing. Patrice listens, asks 2 precise questions and nods. Val stands. She tells Patrice she will be back before midday. She means it. Marcus and Connor move toward the lean-tos without further discussion, already working. The rest of the camp settles into its tentative shape of routine. The water run, the fire, the careful rationing of the meal bars that everyone pretends is not a countdown. Reid Farrow has been working for British intelligence for 7 years. He has been part of the island operation for less than 4 months. He was recruited into it the way most things happen inside that department, obliquely without full context, by a man whose title existed only on paper and whose actual function Reid had spent 18 months trying to precisely identify. The man's name was Ashworth. He summoned Reid to a building in Vauxhall that was not on any public register and offered him a secondment to a classified research unit. He said the work was archival and analytical. He said Reid's background in field assessment and pattern recognition made him an ideal fit. He said very little else. The files came in batches, the earliest ones dated to 1970, handwritten reports from a privately funded scientific consortium that had located a stationary anomaly in the South Pacific. The language was cautious, almost deliberately dull, the way scientific writing gets when the scientists are frightened of what they are writing down. Electromagnetic readings that defied the known behavior of the surrounding ocean floor. A landmass that did not appear consistently on satellite imaging, present in some passes, absent in others, as though the island itself was deciding when to be seen. Reid read these reports 3 times before he accepted that they were genuine. Later files referenced something called the Dharma Initiative, a research program that had operated on the island from the early 1970s until the late 80s, funded by a private foundation called the Hanso Group, staffed by scientists across multiple disciplines. The Dharma files were fragmentary, pieces had clearly been removed, and what remained described a program that had ended badly without specifying how. What Reid could assemble from the gaps. Dharma had built infrastructure on the island, research stations, living quarters, an entire small community. They had studied the island's electromagnetic properties in ways that went far beyond anything the academic literature of the era could account for. And then, somewhere around 1987, they had stopped. Not gradually. The files simply ended, replaced by a terse notation that Reid's superiors had never explained. Event classified. Access restricted. Archive closed. After that, silence, and then years later a new kind of documentation, satellite composites, thermal imaging, the careful notations of analysts who had apparently decided that studying the island from a great distance was preferable to getting any closer. The island was consistently changing. That was the thing that stayed with him. Every analyst who had worked the file had flagged it. The coastline shifting slightly between imaging passes, the interior topology subtly altered, the electromagnetic readings fluctuating in ways that suggested the island itself was not fixed. The satellite imaging had captured at various points what appeared to be several distinct stone formations in the interior, circular, deliberate-looking, each associated with elevated thermal readings. But the imaging was inconsistent. Some formations appeared in one pass and not the next. Others seemed to shift position entirely. The analysts had managed to positively identify and locate only a handful with any confidence. 4, perhaps 5 at most, before the island's changes made further mapping impossible. One analyst had written in a margin note that was probably not intended to survive. It is as though the island does not want to be fully known. Reid had read that note and felt something he was not accustomed to feeling in his professional life, the specific discomfort of a man who has built his entire career on the premise that everything can be understood, if you look carefully enough, confronting evidence that this may not be true. He had been scheduled to join a physical reconnaissance team. Not immediately. The operation was months from deployment. He was still in the analysis phase, still working to locate the missing portions of the Dharma archive, when he was told he would be travelling to Sydney for a briefing with a partner agency. The flight back was booked for him. He did not choose it. This is what he turns over in the hours between 2 and 4 in the morning, when the camp is quiet and the frequency moves through the sand and he cannot stop his mind from running the sequence. Coincidence is a thing that happens. Intelligence agencies also do not book their operatives onto flights by accident. If someone knew this plane would come down on this island and placed him on it deliberately, the question of why is one he cannot yet answer, and the question of what he owes the 46 people sleeping around him is one he is entirely equipped to answer, and has, so far, chosen not to act on. He thinks about their faces. He thinks about the word planted, and what it would mean if they applied it to him. He thinks, trust on this island may be the only currency that actually matters, and he has been spending it very carefully, which is another way of saying he has not been spending it at all. The frequency moves through the ground. He presses his palm flat against the sand and feels it hum. He thinks, I have read everything they wrote about you. It was not enough. He thinks, I am not certain anything would have been. They go 5. Adaeze leads with the map, Val beside her, Sam and Haruki a few steps behind. Reid walks last, adjusting the strap of the bag he carries that no one has seen inside. The jungle closes around them almost immediately. The sounds of the beach, the surf, the creak of the fuselage, Marcus and Connor already moving through the lean-to reinforcement in the practical shorthand of 2 men who have quietly decided to trust each other. All of it disappears. In here the air smells of wet stone and deep green growing things and something underneath those things, something older and mineral and faintly electric that Adaeze has been trying for 3 days to classify and cannot. Reid walks and says nothing and watches everything, as he has been doing since the crash. He compares what he sees against what the files told him to expect. There are discrepancies. There are always discrepancies. He adds them to the running list in the back of his mind that he has not yet decided what to do with. The island is louder inside the canopy than it is on the beach. Sam walks beside Haruki and they talk quietly. About nothing. About home. The small things people reach for when the large things are too close to touch. Sam says he has a daughter, 9 years old, named after his grandmother. Haruki listens the way he listens to everything, with his full attention and without filling the silences. He says, "What's her name?" Sam says, "Abena." Haruki says, "That's a good name." Sam says, "Yeah." He looks up at the light coming through the canopy in long shafts. He says she's going to be fine. He says it in the particular way people say things they need to believe out loud in order to keep believing them at all. Adaeze moves ahead, reading the jungle as she walks. Soil composition, canopy density, the way certain species cluster that tells her things about the water table below. She calls back twice, once to mark a stand of plantain trees 50 yards off the path that she wants to return to, and once to warn them away from a flowering vine along the left side of the trail without explaining why. Her tone makes explanation unnecessary. The first node takes 40 minutes to reach. They know something is different before they see it. Not the frequency, not yet, but the jungle itself. The birds go quiet first, all at once, as though a signal has been given that only they can hear. Then the air changes, a faint pressure, not quite sound, not quite sensation, the way the atmosphere shifts before a storm. Adaeze stops walking. She puts her hand up. They all stop. Through the trees, a clearing, and in the clearing, a stone. It is not a natural formation, too deliberate, too placed, too clearly the work of hands. A large, flat stone, roughly circular, perhaps 4 feet across, set into the earth at a slight angle. On its surface, worn by time but visible, the same symbol from the bunker wall. The compass rose that is not a compass rose, and around its edge carved with the same unhurried care as the map, in the same handwriting as the document in the jar, a number, repeated in a ring around the outer edge. The number 4. None of them move for a long moment, and then, as though the stone has been waiting for exactly this, for 5 people to stand at the edge of its clearing and simply see it. The frequency begins, not the way Adaeze has heard it before, not low, not subtle, Not the thing she has spent 3 days convincing herself might be geological or atmospheric, or some artifact of the crash still working through her nervous system. This is different. This is loud. It comes from the ground first, from below the stone, from somewhere deep in the earth beneath it, a vibration that moves up through the soles of their feet and into their legs and keeps rising. And then it becomes sound, a sustained tone, low and resonant and clear, like a note held by an instrument with no name. It fills the clearing. It fills the spaces between the trees. It is not painful. It is not frightening exactly. It is the sound of something that has been waiting a very long time and is now, for reasons of its own, choosing to be heard. Sam takes a step back. Haruki does not move. He stands completely still with his eyes wide and his hands loose at his sides, and his expression is not fear but recognition, the specific look of someone hearing a thing they have heard before, in a different form. Val's hand goes to her medical bag by reflex, then stops, because there is nothing in her medical bag for this. Adaeze stands at the edge of the clearing with both palms turned outward, not touching anything, simply receiving, her scientist's mind trying to locate the frequency on a spectrum, trying to assign it a measurement, failing, and continuing to try. And Reid takes a very sharp, very quiet breath, and does not move at all. The tone holds for perhaps 30 seconds, and then, just as it begins to fade, the ground moves. Not violently, not the catastrophic lurch of a major quake, something smaller and more deliberate, a deep subterranean shudder that rolls beneath them like a slow exhale. The trees at the edge of the clearing sway. Loose soil shifts around the base of the stone. A crack opens in the earth 2 feet to Adaeze's left, thin as a finger, running from the edge of the stone outward and stopping as abruptly as it started. The whole thing lasts perhaps 4 seconds. Then the ground goes still. The tone fades completely, pulling back down into the earth the way it came. The birds do not return. The clearing holds its silence. Then everyone speaks at once. Sam says, "Was that an earthquake?" Haruki says, "I've heard the sound before." Val says, "Everyone felt that." She looks at each of them in turn. Everyone felt that. Adaeze crouches immediately at the crack in the earth, pressing her fingers along its edge, reading it the way she reads everything, methodically, without panic, already building a hypothesis she doesn't yet have enough data to complete. She says, "I've been hearing the frequency since we landed." Not like that. Quieter. She says, "I thought it was just me." A beat. They look at each other with the particular expression of people recalibrating in real time, revising their understanding of where they are and what is happening to them. Haruki says quietly, "On the plane, right before everything." "I heard something like it." No one answers that. No one is ready to answer that yet. Val turns to Reid, not because she has worked it all out, but because in a clearing where 4 people just spoke over each other in the first honest flood of reaction, any of them have allowed, since the crash, one person stood in complete silence. And Val, who notices what people withhold as reliably as what they offer, looks at him and says, "You're not surprised." It is not a question. Reid looks at her, then at the stone, then at all of them, Sam and Haruki still watching him, Adaeze who has looked up from the crack in the earth now too, her expression not yet angry, just precise and waiting. His still eyes move across their faces one by one. And then something in him settles, the way a man settles when he's been carrying something heavy long enough that the muscles simply cannot hold it anymore. He says, no, I'm not surprised. He says, I need to tell you something. He says it carefully, the way a man says something he has rehearsed not saying for a very long time. He says, I worked for British intelligence. A department most people inside British intelligence don't know exists. Our function was to locate things governments weren't supposed to know about and decide what to do with that knowledge. He pauses, he says, this island is one of those things. There are files going back to 1970, satellite composites, electromagnetic surveys, reports from a research program called Dharma that operated here from the early 70s until the late 80s, when it ended badly and the archive went dark. He says, I was brought onto the island project only a few months ago. The files were incomplete, deliberately so, and there was a great deal I hadn't yet been given access to. But I studied everything they gave me. He looks at all of them. He says, I have never set foot on this island before this plane went down. Everything I know about it, I learned from a desk. The clearing is very quiet. Sam says you knew about this island before the crash. Reid says yes. Sam says, and you said nothing. For 3 days. Reid says yes. Val says the sound, the electromagnetic readings, that's in your files. Reid nods. He says the Dharma program was built around studying the island's electromagnetic properties. The readings they documented were unlike anything in the scientific literature of the time. He says, what just happened? He looks at the stone, at the crack in the earth, at the space where the sound still seems to linger. The files describe anomalous audio and seismic phenomena associated with elevated electromagnetic activity on the island. He says, I didn't know it would be like that. He says it plainly. He says, I don't think the files prepared me for any of this being real in the way that it's real. Adaeze says, and the map, the nodes, the stones. Reid shakes his head. He says none of it. The symbol, yes. It appears in the Dharma documentation. But 23 stones mapped across the interior. He looks at her directly. He says that map describes something I have never encountered in any file I've read. Either the files were far more incomplete than I understood, or these stones are something that came after Dharma, something the island has done that no one outside of it has ever documented. Adaeze has been quiet through all of this. Now she speaks. She says, you had documentation on this island, a research program, electromagnetic surveys, decades of files. And for 3 days you watched us struggle. You watched me spend 2 hours in the jungle trying to figure out what was safe to eat. You watched 47 people sleep on a beach frightened and without context, while you held information that could have changed how we understood where we are. Her voice is level and precise, which makes it more cutting than volume would. She says, people are still frightened. And you said nothing. Reid does not look away. He says, yes. Adaeze says, why? He says, because the files are old and incomplete, and what I've seen since we landed doesn't always match what they describe. He says, and because, he stops. He says more quietly, because I've also been trying to determine whether I was put on that plane deliberately, whether someone in my department knew this flight would come down here and chose to put me on it. He says it without asking for sympathy. He says, if that's true and I told you what I knew, the first thing any reasonable person would ask is whether I was part of what brought us here. He meets their eyes, each in turn. He says, I don't know the answer to that. I am still trying to find it. And I didn't know how to start telling you something I couldn't finish. The stone behind them has gone still and warm. The jungle has found its sounds again, slowly, tentatively, bird by bird. Val says, "Is there anything you know, anything in those files, that we need to hear right now to keep 47 people alive?" Reid says yes, but some of it needs to be said in front of everyone. Val nods once. She says, "Tonight, after everyone eats, all of it." She tells Haruki and Sam we'll explain the rest later. She says it in the tone she uses when she needs people to hold steady just a little longer, and both of them, without quite knowing why, do. Adaeze does not look at Reid again. She takes out the map, marks the first node, and looks at the remaining 22. She turns toward the path. She says, "Let's head back." They walk out in single file. Reid goes last. Behind them, the stone sits in its clearing, warm, patient, surrounded by its perfect circle of pulled-back jungle. The frequency does not return, but it does not feel gone exactly. It feels like something that has made its point and is now simply waiting to see what they will do with it. Sleep well. The map is real. The island has been waiting for all of you. The question now is whether you are ready to find out why.